the quiet village of St. Mary's Mead, a priceless 16th century map vanishes from a locked library case, leaving only a mysterious smudge. Miss Jane Marple, with her sharp eyes and gentle smile, unravels a web of secrets. Was it the nervous librarian, hiding debts? The obsessive scholar chasing ancient ciphers? The charming tourist slipping away at dawn? Or the proud collector whose vault holds an empty frame? As whispers swirl and shadows deepen, Miss Marple's keen mind reveals a truth driven by greed and pride. Will the Mapper de Haviland's secrets return to the light, or remain lost forever? Chapter 1. The Quiet of St. Mary's Library. The autumn sun cast a mellow glow over St. Mary's Mead, where ivy-clad cottages nestled beneath the shadow of St. Mary's Church. In the heart of the village stood the library, a Georgian edifice of weathered stone, its tall windows reflecting the golden leaves that drifted lazily to the ground. Within its oak-panelled archive room lay the pride of the collection, the Mapper de Haviland, a 16th century map of exquisite detail, its inked trade routes curling like veins across vellum, hinting at secrets of a bygone mercantile age. To the villagers, it was a curiosity. To scholars and collectors, a treasure beyond price. Miss Jane Marple, seated by her cottage window, was absorbed in the rhythm of her knitting needles, crafting a shawl in soft lavender wool. The click-clack of the needles was a counterpoint to her thoughts, which often wandered to the patterns of human behaviour, as intricate and telling as her stitches. Her cottage, with its chintz curtains and polished mahogany, was a haven of order, yet her mind thrived on the subtle disorders of village life. It was just past 11 when the garden gate creaked, and Mrs. Dolly Bantry, her face flushed with excitement, swept into the sitting room, her tweed coat still dusted with morning dew. "Jane, it's outrageous," Mrs. Bantry declared, sinking into an armchair without ceremony. "The Mapper de Haviland, stolen, right from the library's archive. Can you imagine?" Miss Marple's needles paused, her mild blue eyes lifting to meet her friend's. "Stolen?" she repeated, her voice soft but keen. "Dear me, that is most disturbing. Tell me everything, Dolly." Mrs. Bantry, never one to resist a tale, leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. The theft had been discovered that morning by Miss Eliza Thorne, the librarian, when she opened the archive room to prepare for a scholar's visit. The glass case, which housed the map under lock and key, stood empty, its velvet lining bare, save for a faint smudge, as if the thief had mocked the library's care. The village was abuzz, and Inspector Craddock, newly assigned to the county, had arrived to take charge. "He's at his wit's end already," Mrs. Bantry confided. "No sign of a break-in, no clues. He's coming to see you, Jane. He knows your knack for these things." Miss Marple smiled faintly, resuming her knitting. "Oh, I'm sure the inspector has matters well in hand," she said, though her mind was already turning, sifting through the implications. A rare map, valuable and delicate, stolen without a trace. It suggested not a casual thief, but one with purpose, perhaps even obsession. "Who was at the library yesterday?" she asked, her tone deceptively casual. Mrs. Bantry, eager to spill the village's latest whispers, ticked off the names on her fingers. "Miss Thorne, of course. She's always there, fussing over her books. Then Dr. Harold Grayson, that scholar from Oxford, all nose and spectacles, mad about old maps. A tourist, too, some young man called Peter Walsh. staying at the Blue Boar, and Sir Reginald Vance, that collector fellow with the big manor up the hill. You know the sort. Thinks he owns history itself." Miss Marple nodded, her fingers deftly looping yarn. She knew Sir Reginald's type. Wealthy, proud, with a collector's hunger that could border on ruthlessness. Dr. Grayson, too, might be driven by scholarly zeal, and a tourist like Walsh, unknown to the village, could hide any number of motives behind a charming smile. As for Miss Thorne, 20 years of devotion to the library might conceal a private grievance or desperation. "People are so very interesting," Miss Marple murmured, almost to herself. "They carry their secrets like books, don't they? One only needs to know how to read them." Mrs. Bantry, catching the glint in her friend's eye, chuckled. "You're already unravelling it, aren't you, Jane? I swear, you see more from this armchair than Craddock does with all his policemen." Before Miss Marple could reply, a knock sounded at the door. It was Inspector Craddock, his face lined with the strain of a case that promised no easy answers. He removed his hat, revealing neatly combed hair, and greeted Miss Marple with a mix of respect and faint exasperation. "Miss Marple, I hope I'm not intruding. Mrs. Bantry's told me you might shed some light on this business at the library." "Not at all, Inspector," Miss Marple said, gesturing to a chair. "Do sit down. A cup of tea, perhaps. And tell me, what does the library look like this morning?" As Craddock described the scene, the unforced lock, the empty case, the archive's hushed sanctity violated, Miss Marple listened, her needles moving steadily. She saw, in her mind's eye, the library's quiet order, the kind of place where secrets might slip through unnoticed, like a shadow in candlelight. "A most intriguing puzzle," she said at last, her voice gentle but firm. "I think, Inspector, I should like to see the archive room myself. Sometimes the smallest detail speaks the loudest." Craddock agreed. And as Mrs. Bantry chattered about calling a village meeting, Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to St. Mary's Mead, where every face was familiar, yet every heart held its mysteries. The Mappa de Havilland was more than a map. It was a mirror, reflecting the desires of those who coveted it. And Miss Marple, with her quiet wisdom, intended to read its reflections clearly. Chapter 2. The Scene of the Crime. The morning mist still clung to the cobblestones of St. Mary's Mead, as Miss Jane Marple stepped lightly from her cottage, her black velvet hat tilted just so, and her sensible shoes tapping a purposeful rhythm. Inspector Craddock, at her side, carried an air of professional restraint, though his glance betrayed a flicker of curiosity at the elderly spinster who seemed to unravel mysteries, as deftly as she unravelled her knitting. The library loomed ahead, its Georgian facade serene, yet now shadowed by the scandal of theft. The Mappa de Havilland, that delicate relic of cartographic art, had vanished, and the village buzzed with speculation as thick as the fog. Miss Marple's eyes, bright and birdlike, took in the scene as they approached. The library's heavy oak door stood ajar, guarded by a young constable who saluted Craddock with a nervous nod. "No one's been in since we sealed it, sir," he reported, his voice low, as if the theft had robbed the building of its sanctity. Miss Marple paused, her gloved hand resting lightly on the doorframe, noting the absence of scratches or splintered wood. "A lock unforced," she murmured, almost to herself. "Suggests familiarity, does it not, Inspector?" Craddock, adjusting his hat, gave a non-committal grunt. "Could be a professional job, Miss Marple. Thieves have their tricks." But his tone held a trace of doubt, and he gestured for her to enter, clearly eager for her observations. The library's interior was a haven of polished wood and hushed reverence. Shelves of leather-bound volumes stretched toward the high ceiling, their gilt titles catching the light from tall mullioned windows. The air smelled of wax and old paper, a scent Miss Marple found oddly comforting, reminiscent of her father's study in her youth. She followed Craddock past the main reading room, where a few villagers whispered over their newspapers, their glances darting toward the archive room's door. "They're all talking about it," Craddock said, his voice dry. "By noon, half the village will have their own theory." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "And by evening, half those theories will be nonsense. But one or two, Inspector, may hold a grain of truth." Her eyes twinkled as she stepped into the archive room, a smaller chamber at the library's heart, its walls lined with locked cabinets, and its center dominated by the now infamous glass case. The case stood on a mahogany pedestal, its brass fittings gleaming under a single chandelier. The velvet lining within, a deep crimson, bore the faint outline where the map de Haviland had rested, its absence as stark as a missing tooth. Miss Marple leaned closer, her magnifying glass, kept in her handbag for such occasions, held delicately to her eye. A smudge, barely perceptible, marred the velvet near the edge, oily and irregular. "Not dust," she said softly, "nor a careless fingerprint. Something more deliberate, perhaps." Craddock, peering over her shoulder, frowned. "Could be from the thief's glove. We found no prints, not even partials. The case was wiped clean." He straightened, his hands clasped behind his back. "Miss Thorne swears she locked it at 6 last evening, as always. The key never leaves her." Miss Marple nodded, her gaze sweeping the room. The archive was orderly, almost oppressively so, with every cabinet labelled and every surface polished. A single window, high and narrow, admitted a sliver of light, but its latch was secure, the glass unmarred. "No one climbed through that," she observed, "and the door shows no tampering. The thief, then, was someone who belonged here, or appeared to." Craddock produced a notebook, flipping it open with a practiced motion. 4 people had access yesterday, according to Miss Thorne. She was here all day, of course, tending the archive. Dr. Harold Grayson, the scholar, arrived at 10 to study the map. Peter Walsh, a tourist, came at noon, poking about for half an hour. And Sir Reginald Vance, the collector, was here from 3 to 4, asking to see the map specifically. Each was alone with it briefly, while Miss Thorne stepped out, fetching a ledger, answering a query, that sort of thing. Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. "Briefly, you say? Yet long enough, perhaps, for a determined hand." She moved to the cabinet nearest the case, its lock gleaming as new. "These are secure, I presume?" "Checked them all," Craddock confirmed. "Nothing else missing, just the map. It's as if the thief knew exactly what they wanted." "Indeed," Miss Marple said, her voice soft but weighted. "And that, Inspector, is the first thread of our tapestry." She turned, her eyes lingering on the smudge. "This mark, oily, you said. Perhaps glove oil, the kind used to preserve fine leather or vellum. Collectors use it, do they not? To handle their treasures without damage." Craddock's eyebrows rose. "You're thinking of Vance? He's got a reputation for hoarding artifacts. But Grayson's no stranger to old documents, and even Walsh could have had a motive we don't know yet. As for Miss Thorne, he hesitated, glancing toward the door where the librarian stood, her hands twisting a handkerchief. Miss Eliza Thorne was a woman of 50, her greying hair pinned tightly, her dress a shade of navy that matched her air of quiet authority. Yet her eyes, red-rimmed, betrayed agitation as she approached. "Miss Marple, Inspector, I assure you, I've never been so humiliated. 20 years I've kept this archive, and not a page out of place. To think someone could—" Her voice broke, and she dabbed her eyes. Miss Marple's expression softened, though her gaze remained sharp. "My dear Miss Thorne, no one doubts your dedication. But tell me, how well do you know these visitors? Dr. Grayson, for instance? His interest in the map was scholarly, I take it." "Oh, yes," Miss Thorne said, her voice steadying. "He's been here before, always poring over the map as symbols. He says they're linked to some lost trade route, though I confess I don't follow his theories. He handled the case yesterday, checking the vellum's condition. I left him for a moment to fetch a catalogue. And Mr. Walsh?" Miss Marple prompted, her tone gentle but probing. Miss Thorne's lips tightened. "A tourist, nothing more. Young, pleasant enough, but he seemed aimless. Asked about the map, but I doubt he understood its value. I stepped out to answer the telephone while he was here. He was gone when I returned." Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloguing the librarian's unease. "And Sir Reginald Vance?" At this, Miss Thorne's hands stilled, her handkerchief crumpling slightly. "Sir Reginald is a patron of the library. He's donated funds, you know, for preservation. He insisted on seeing the map yesterday, said it was a masterpiece. I left him to lock the case while I attended to a delivery at the front desk. He was most particular about it." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed imperceptibly. "Particular," she repeated, as if tasting the word. "And you locked the archive door when you closed last evening?" "Of course," Miss Thorne said, almost sharply. "I checked the case myself at 6. The map was there, I swear it." Craddock, scribbling in his notebook, looked up, and no one else entered after that. No late visitors, no cleaners. "None," Miss Thorne said firmly. "The library was empty when I left. I locked the main door myself." Miss Marple stepped back to the glass case, her magnifying glass catching the chandelier's light. "This smudge," she said almost to herself, "is most curious." Not a careless mark, but one left by someone handling the map with care. Perhaps too much care. She turned to Craddock. "Might we speak to the constable who patrols the village at night? He may have seen someone near the library after hours." Craddock nodded, making a note. "Already on it. Constable Hearn's report should be ready by noon. He's thorough, but he didn't mention anything unusual last night." "Sometimes," Miss Marple said, her voice soft as a whisper, "the usual is what hides the unusual." She glanced at Miss Thorne, who stood rigid, her face pale. "Thank you, Miss Thorne. You've been most helpful. I think I should like to sit in the reading room for a moment, if I may. The light there is so pleasant." As Miss Thorne led them out, Miss Marple's mind was already weaving threads. The archive's sanctity, its locked door, the smudge, all pointed to a thief who moved with precision, perhaps with privilege. Doctor, Grayson's scholarly passion could mask a deeper greed. Walsh's charm might conceal a sharper purpose. Sir Reginald's wealth and pride suggested a man accustomed to possessing what he desired. And Miss Thorne, her agitation hinted at something unspoken, perhaps a fear beyond the theft itself. In the reading room, Miss Marple settled into a chair by a window, her knitting bag at her side. The villagers' whispers filled the air, a tapestry of half-truths and guesses. She heard the grocer's wife mention Walsh's late-night walk, the postman's tale of Miss Thorne's debts, a maid's hint about Sir Reginald's secretive visitors. Miss Marple listened, her needles clicking softly, each stitch a step toward clarity. Craddock, standing nearby, shifted impatiently. "What do you make of it, Miss Marple?" "It's a locked-room mystery, practically. No forced entry, no witnesses, just that smudge." Miss Marple's eyes met his, calm and knowing. "A locked room, Inspector, is only as secure as the people who hold its keys, and people, you see, are never quite what they seem." She paused, her needle still. "I think we shall find our thief among those who knew the map's value, and the library's ways. But first, let us hear what Constable Hearn saw in the dark." As Craddock moved to summon the constable, Miss Marple gazed out the window, where the mist was lifting, revealing the village in sharp relief. The Mappa de Havilland was more than a map. It was a lure, drawing out the desires of those who crossed its path. And Miss Marple, with her quiet gaze and sharper mind, was ready to follow where those desires led. Chapter 3. The Librarian's Tale. The late morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Marple's cottage, casting delicate shadows on the polished floor. Miss Jane Marple sat in her favourite armchair, her knitting needles moving with a steady rhythm, the lavender wool shawl taking shape in her lap. The village of St. Mary's Mead was still abuzz with the theft of the Mappa de Havilland, and Miss Marple had invited Miss Eliza Thorne, the librarian, for tea, sensing that the woman's nervous demeanour at the library held more than mere distress over the crime. Miss Thorne arrived promptly at 11, her navy dress immaculate, but her face drawn, as if sleep had eluded her. She clutched a small handbag, her knuckles pale, and accepted the offered seat with a murmur of thanks. "You're very kind, Miss Marple," she said, her voice tight. "I'm still quite shaken, you know. The library has never seen such a scandal." Miss Marple poured tea from a china pot, her movements deliberate, her eyes warm but observant. "My dear Miss Thorne, it must be dreadful for you. 20 years of care, and then this. But tell me, how are you managing? It's no small thing to have such a treasure stolen under one's watch." Miss Thorne's teacup trembled slightly as she lifted it. "I feel I've failed the village," she confessed. "The Mappa was entrusted to me. I checked the case myself at 6 o'clock, as I always do, and it was there, safe under lock and key. I locked the archive door, then the main entrance, and went home. To think someone could have—" Her voice faltered, and she set the cup down, her hands twisting together. Miss Marple nodded sympathetically, though her mind noted the slight hesitation in Miss Thorne's words, as if they were rehearsed. "It's most curious," she said gently, "that the thief left no trace. The lock unforced, the case wiped clean save for that smudge. You've seen nothing unusual in the days before? No odd visitors or inquiries about the map?" Miss Thorne shook her head, but her eyes flicked to the window, avoiding Miss Marple's gaze. "Nothing out of the ordinary. Dr. Grayson has been studying the map for weeks, of course. always scribbling in his notebook. Mr. Walsh was just a tourist, passing through, asking questions about the village's history. And Sir Reginald, she paused, her lips pressing into a thin line. He's always been generous to the library. He asked to see the map specially, said it was a marvel. I left him for a moment to handle a delivery, but he was gone when I returned. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, a counterpoint to her thoughts. Sir Reginald is a collector, is he not? Such men often have a particular attachment to rare things. Her tone was light, but her eyes were sharp, watching Miss Thorne's reaction. The librarian's hands tightened on her handbag. He's donated funds for preservation, as I told the inspector. He's passionate about antiquities, yes, but he's respectable. I can't imagine him stooping to theft. Her voice rose slightly, a defensive edge creeping in. Of course, Miss Marple said soothingly, offering a plate of shortbread. And Mr. Walsh, did he seem interested in the map's value? Young men can be so unpredictable. Miss Thorne took a biscuit, crumbling it absently. He was polite but flighty. Asked about the map's age, its origins, but he didn't linger. I thought him more curious about the village than the archive. He was alone for a few minutes while I answered a call, but the case was locked when I returned. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind turning over the librarian's words. Miss Thorne's account was precise, yet there was a tremor in her manner, a shadow of unease that suggested more than professional embarrassment. And Dr. Grayson, Miss Marple continued, his work must require great care with such delicate artifacts. Did he handle the map itself? No, only the case, Miss Thorne said quickly. He examined the vellum through the glass, checking for signs of decay. He's meticulous, always has been. I stepped out to fetch a ledger he requested, but I was only gone a moment. She paused, then added, he seemed agitated yesterday, more than usual, kept muttering about the map's symbols, something about a lost route to the Indies. Miss Marple's eyes brightened, though her expression remained serene. How fascinating! Scholars can be so absorbed in their work, can't they? Almost as if the object of their study becomes personal. She set her knitting aside, folding her hands. Miss Thorne, you've been most kind to share this. It must be trying, keeping such a busy archive. I've heard the library's funds are stretched thin these days. Miss Thorne's face flushed, and she looked down at her teacup. We manage, she said curtly. Sir Reginald's donations help, and the village council provides what they can. But yes, it's a struggle to maintain the collection properly. Miss Marple nodded, her smile gentle, but her mind alert. The village whispers, carried by the postman and the grocer's wife, had hinted at Miss Thorne's financial straits. A modest inheritance spent, a brother in debt. Such pressures could make even the most dutiful soul vulnerable to temptation or to influence. You've done wonders with the library, Miss Marple said warmly. It's a credit to you. But tell me, did anyone else show interest in the map recently? Perhaps someone less official? Miss Thorne hesitated, her fingers smoothing the edge of her handbag. No one specific. There was a letter last month, anonymous, asking about the map's provenance. I thought it a scholar's inquiry and replied through the post office box provided. I mentioned it to Sir Reginald, as he's our patron, and he seemed concerned, but said it was likely harmless. Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted slightly. An anonymous letter? How curious. And you kept no copy of your reply?" "I didn't think it necessary," Miss Thorne said, her voice faltering. "It was just a routine query. I told them the map's history, its acquisition in 1890, its value to cartographers, nothing more." Miss Marple leaned forward, her voice soft as a whisper. "And Sir Reginald's concern? Did he say why it troubled him?" Miss Thorne shook her head, her eyes darting to the door. "He only said we must be vigilant. Collectors, you know, hear of such things and worry about forgeries or theft." She stood abruptly, smoothing her dress. "I really must get back to the library, Miss Marple. The inspector may need me, and there's so much to do." "Of course," Miss Marple said, rising to see her out. "You've been most helpful, Miss Thorne. Do take care, and if anything else comes to mind, you know where to find me." As the gate clicked shut behind the librarian, Miss Marple returned to her armchair, her knitting untouched for the moment. The room was quiet, save for the tick of the mantel clock, but her mind was alive with patterns. Miss Thorne's agitation was more than professional pride. It was personal, perhaps rooted in fear or guilt. The anonymous letter dismissed so quickly was a thread worth pulling, and Sir Reginald's reaction to it suggested a man who knew more than he shared. Dr. Grayson's agitation and Walsh's fleeting presence added their own colours to the tapestry, each suspect a knot to be untangled. Miss Marple picked up her needles, the lavender wool slipping through her fingers. "People are so very revealing," she murmured, "when they think they're hiding something." She thought of her niece's friend, a young woman who'd once hidden a secret behind a too bright smile, and how a single misplaced word had unravelled her story. Miss Thorne's nervous hands, her quick defence of Sir Reginald, her dismissal of the letter, they were misplaced words in action, betraying a story not yet fully told. Outside, the village went about its day, unaware of the quiet spinster whose mind was piecing together its secrets. The Mappa de Havilland was more than a stolen artifact. It was a mirror reflecting the desires and fears of those who had stood before it. Miss Marple's needles clicked on, each stitch a step closer to the truth, and she resolved to visit Dr. Grayson next, to see what his scholarly passion might reveal. Chapter 4. The Scholar's Obsession. The vicarage garden, with its neatly trimmed roses and lingering scent of late summer blooms, provided a tranquil setting for Miss Jane Marple's next inquiry. She sat on a wicker chair beneath a pergola, her knitting bag at her side, the lavender shawl now a cascade of soft loops across her lap. Dr. Harold Grayson, the scholar whose name had surfaced repeatedly in connection with the Mappa de Havilland, had agreed to meet her here at the vicar's invitation. The vicarage, neutral ground, was a place where tongues might loosen, and Miss Marple knew the value of a quiet setting for uncovering truths. Dr. Grayson arrived promptly, his thin frame slightly stooped, as if years of poring over manuscripts had shaped his posture. His tweed jacket was frayed at the cuffs, his spectacles perched precariously on a sharp nose, and his fingers bore the faint stains of ink, a testament to his trade. He carried a leather notebook, its edges worn, and his eyes, though tired, held a spark of intensity that Miss Marple noted at once. "Miss Marple," he greeted, his voice clipped but polite. "I understand you're assisting Inspector Craddock." "I'm happy to help, though I'm as baffled as anyone by this theft." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes crinkling with warmth. "How kind of you, Doctor. Grayson, Do sit down. The vicar's garden is so peaceful, don't you think? A perfect place to clear one's thoughts." She gestured to a chair, her knitting needles pausing as she poured tea from a tray the vicar's wife had thoughtfully provided. "The Mapper de Haviland must be a great loss to your work. I hear you've studied it closely." Grayson's face tightened, a flicker of emotion crossing his features. "A loss? It's a catastrophe," he said, his voice rising before he caught himself. "That map is unique, Miss Marple. Its symbols, cryptic annotations in a cipher no one has fully decoded, point to trade routes lost to history. I've spent years piecing together their meaning. To have it stolen—" He shook his head, clutching his notebook as if it were a lifeline. Miss Marple's needles resumed their soft clicking, a soothing counterpoint to Grayson's agitation. "How fascinating," she said. "A cipher, you say? It must be thrilling to unravel such mysteries. Tell me, what brought you to the map yesterday?" Grayson adjusted his spectacles, his fingers restless. "I needed to verify a detail, a mark near the eastern border, possibly a reference to a spice route. I visited the archive at 10, as Miss Thorne will confirm. I examined the case, checked the vellum's condition through the glass. It was pristine, no sign of degradation. I asked Miss Thorne for a catalogue to cross-reference dates, and she stepped out briefly. I was alone for perhaps 5 minutes. Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of polite interest, though her mind was sifting his words. 5 minutes, she repeated softly. Not long, but enough for a keen eye to observe much. Did you notice anything unusual? The case, perhaps? Or the room itself?" Grayson hesitated, his gaze dropping to his notebook. "Nothing out of the ordinary. The case was locked, the room quiet. I was focused on my notes." He opened the notebook, revealing pages dense with sketches of the map's symbols, each annotated in a precise hand. "This is my work, years of it. The map is the key to proving my theory about a forgotten trade network. Without it, He trailed off, his voice thick with frustration. Miss Marple leaned forward, her eyes gentle but piercing. "You're a man of dedication, Doctor. Grayson, such passion can be consuming, can it not? I once knew a curate who became so absorbed in his sermons he forgot his own wedding day." She chuckled, but her gaze held steady. "Did you see anyone else in the library that day? Mr. Walsh, perhaps? Or Sir Reginald Vance?" Grayson's lips twitched, a faint grimace. "I saw Walsh in the reading room as I left. A young man too casual for my taste, asking Miss Thorne about local history. He didn't strike me as serious. Sir Reginald wasn't there when I was, but I know his reputation. Collectors like him care more for possession than knowledge." His tone carried a trace of disdain, and Miss Marple noted it, filing it away like a stitch in her pattern. "And Miss Thorne," Miss Marple continued, offering a biscuit, "she must be invaluable to your research, knowing the archive so well." Grayson took the biscuit absently, crumbling it between his fingers. "She's competent, yes, but overly cautious. Always hovering, checking the locks. Yesterday, she seemed distracted, kept glancing at the door. I thought it odd, but scholars don't always notice such things." He paused, then added, "She mentioned an anonymous letter about the map some weeks ago. I told her it was likely a rival academic sniffing around my work." Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted slightly, though her face remained serene. "An anonymous letter? How intriguing! Did she share its contents with you?" "Only that it asked about the map's history," Grayson said, his voice dismissive. "I told her to ignore it. My competitors would love to steal a march from my research, but they wouldn't resort to theft. Not like this." His eyes narrowed, a flash of suspicion crossing them. "Unless— no, it's unthinkable." Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze steady. "Unthinkable, Doctor, Grayson, or merely inconvenient? You've spent years with the map. It must feel almost like a part of you." Grayson stiffened, his fingers tightening on the notebook. "I'm a scholar, Miss Marple, not a thief. My interest is in the map's secrets, not its ownership. I was in my lodgings at the Blue Boar all evening, working on my notes. The innkeeper can confirm I didn't leave until morning." Miss Marple smiled, her voice soft as a whisper. "Of course, Dr. Grayson. I only mean that passion can blind us sometimes, don't you think? Like my nephew Raymond, who once forgot his own birthday over a novel he was writing." She resumed her knitting, the needles clicking rhythmically. "You've been most helpful. Tell me, did you notice anything about the case itself? A mark, perhaps, or a scent?" Grayson frowned, considering. "A scent? No, nothing like that. The case was clean, the glass polished. Though," he hesitated, his brow furrowing, "there was a faint smell in the archive now that you mention it. Like oil, perhaps, but I thought it was the wood polish Miss Thorne uses. I didn't think much of it at the time." Miss Marple's eyes brightened, though her expression remained unchanged. "Oil," she murmured. "How curious. The smallest details can be so telling, can't they?" She set her knitting aside, folding her hands. "You've given me much to think about, Doctor." "Grayson, I shan't keep you from your work." Grayson rose, his movements jerky, as if reluctant to leave the conversation unfinished. "If there's anything else I can do, Miss Marple, you have only to ask. The map must be found, for scholarship's sake, if nothing else." He clutched his notebook tightly, his eyes lingering on her with a mix of wariness and respect. As he departed, Miss Marple sat back, her mind weaving the threads of their talk. Grayson's obsession was palpable, his disdain for collectors like Sir Reginald, revealing a pride in his own intellectual purity. Yet his agitation, his quick dismissal of the anonymous letter, and the mention of an oily scent, all were stitches in the pattern. She recalled a village schoolmaster years ago, whose fervour for rare books had led him to borrow one, permanently, convinced it was his due. Scholars, she knew, could be as possessive as collectors, their motives cloaked in loftier ideals. The vicarage garden was quiet now, the roses nodding in the breeze. Miss Marple picked up her needles, the lavender wool slipping through her fingers. "Passion," she murmured, "is a dangerous thing when it forgets its boundaries." She resolved to meet Peter Walsh next, to test the mettle of the charming tourist whose presence seemed so conveniently fleeting. The Mapper de Haviland, she sensed, was drawing out desires as surely as it had once charted routes, and Miss Marple was determined to follow its course to the truth. Chapter 5. The Visitor's Charm. The Blue Boar Inn, with its low beams and crackling hearth, was the heart of St. Mary's Mead's social hum, where travellers and locals alike mingled over pints and gossip. Miss Jane Marple, her black velvet hat perched neatly atop her silver hair, stepped into the inn's cosy tea-room, her knitting bag tucked under her arm. She had arranged to meet Peter Walsh, The young tourist whose brief visit to the library's archive coincided with the theft of the map de Havilland. The inn's warmth was a welcome contrast to the crisp autumn air, and Miss Marple settled at a corner table, her eyes scanning the room with the quiet alertness of a sparrow. Peter Walsh arrived with a spring in his step, his boyish grin lighting up his tanned face. He was in his late 20s, dressed in a well-cut jacket that suggested means if not wealth, and his dark hair was swept back with a casual charm that Miss Marple noted at once. "Miss Marple, a pleasure," he said, shaking her hand with a warmth that felt practiced yet genuine. "I hear you're the village sleuth, sorting out this map business. Quite a stir for a quiet place like this." Miss Marple smiled, her needles clicking softly as she drew out the lavender shawl. "Oh, I'm just an old woman who listens, Mr. Walsh. St. Mary's Mead may seem quiet, but it has its little dramas. Do sit down. Mrs. Clements makes a fine scone here, and the tea is quite tolerable." She poured from a pot, her movements deliberate, her eyes never leaving his face. Walsh slid into the chair opposite, his posture relaxed but his gaze sharp, as if sizing her up. "Happy to help," he said, spreading jam on a scone with a flourish. "Though I'm afraid I'm a bit of a bystander in this tale. Just passing through, you know, soaking up the English countryside." Miss Marple's smile deepened, her voice gentle but probing. "How delightful! And what brought you to our little library? Not many tourists seek out old maps, I find, unless they've a particular interest." Walsh chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "Curiosity mostly. I'm a bit of a wanderer. Been all over, from Cairo to Capri. Heard about your famous map from a chap at my hotel in London. Said it was a must-see if I was in the area. So I popped in, had a look, asked Miss Thorne a few questions. Nothing deep, I'm afraid. Maps aren't really my thing, more of a ruins and taverns fellow." Miss Marple nodded, her needles moving steadily. "And yet you visited the archive itself, Mr. Walsh. That's rather more than a casual glance. What did you make of the map de Havilland?" He shrugged, his grin unwavering. "Pretty thing, I suppose. Old, delicate, lots of squiggly lines. Miss Thorne said it was worth a fortune, but I wouldn't know a rare map from a pub menu. I was only in there a few minutes. Miss Thorne had to take a phone call. Left me poking about. Case was locked tight when she came back, far as I could tell." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her expression remained serene. "A few minutes," she murmured. "Time enough to notice details, perhaps. Did you see anyone else in the library? Dr. Grayson, perhaps? Or Sir Reginald Vance?" Walsh took a sip of tea, his fingers tapping lightly on the cup. "Didn't see Grayson, though I heard he's a regular, knows in his books. Sir Reginald was there earlier, I think. Saw him leaving as I arrived. Big fellow, all pomp and polish, striding out like he owned the place. Didn't speak to him, though. I was more interested in chatting up Miss Thorne. She's a bit stern, but I reckon she's got stories." Miss Marple chuckled softly, recalling a young man from her nephew's circle, who used charm to deflect suspicion after a petty theft. "Young men with charm," she said, "often have a way of making themselves memorable. Tell me, Mr. Walsh, where were you after your visit to the library? The village is so small. One might notice a stranger about in the evening." His grin faltered for a fraction of a second, but he recovered quickly, leaning forward with a conspiratorial air. "You've got me there, Miss Marple. I was at the inn mostly. having a pint or two in the bar. Talked to the barmaid, Molly, is it, till about 9, then went up to my room to pack. I'm off to Bath tomorrow, you see, early start." Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze steady. "Packing already? You've only been here a day or two, haven't you? Such a quick visit for a wanderer." Walsh laughed, a touch too loudly. "That's me, always on the move. Got a friend in Bath, promised to meet him for a bit of sightseeing. Besides, this village is charming, but a fellow needs a bit more action after a while." He winked, but Miss Marple noted the slight tightening of his jaw, the way his fingers drummed on the table. She offered another scone, her voice as soft as the steam rising from the teapot. "Of course. And the library. Did you notice anything unusual there? A sound, perhaps, or a scent? The archive room has such a distinct air, with all that old paper and polish." Walsh tilted his head, considering. "A scent? Can't say I noticed much. Maybe a whiff of something oily, but I figured it was the furniture wax. Place was spotless, like a museum. The case looked secure, though I didn't get too close. Didn't want Miss Thorne thinking I was up to no good." He grinned again, but Miss Marple's sharp eyes caught a flicker of unease, as if he'd said more than intended. "How thoughtful of you," she said, her tone warm, but laced with a quiet precision. "And Miss Thorne, she must have been busy with so many visitors that day. Did she seem herself to you?" Walsh shrugged, spreading his hands. "Seemed a bit jumpy, now that you mention it. Kept checking her watch, like she had somewhere to be. But librarians are like that, aren't they? Always fussing over their books." He leaned back, his charm settling over him like a well-worn cloak. "Look, Miss Marple, I'm just a tourist who wandered into the wrong story. If I saw anything useful, I'd tell you, Scout's honour." Miss Marple smiled, her needles clicking once more. "I'm sure you would, Mr. Walsh. You remind me of a young man I knew, always full of stories from far-off places. He had a knack for being in the right place at the wrong time." She paused, her eyes gentle but piercing. "You'll let me know if you recall anything else, won't you? Even the smallest detail can be so helpful." Walsh nodded, rising with a flourish. "You've got it, Miss Marple. If I think of anything, I'll be straight back. Enjoy your scones." He flashed another grin and sauntered out, his footsteps light but purposeful. Miss Marple sat back, her knitting resuming its rhythm. The tea-room was quiet now, save for the murmur of voices from the bar and the clink of Mrs. Clement's clearing plates. Walsh's charm was undeniable, a polished veneer that deflected questions as smoothly as it invited trust. But his quick departure, his vague account of the evening, and that fleeting mention of an oily scent, they were threads in the pattern, loose but telling. She recalled a travelling salesman from years past, whose easy smile had hidden a penchant for pilfering, caught only when a maid noticed his overstuffed suitcase. The oily scent, mentioned now by both Grayson and Walsh, was particularly intriguing. It matched the smudge on the velvet lining, suggesting a careful hand, perhaps one accustomed to handling delicate artifacts. Walsh's casual dismissal of the map's value felt too studied, and his sudden plan to leave for Bath raised questions. Was he a drifter, as he claimed, or a man with a purpose, slipping through St. Mary's Mead like a shadow? Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind weaving the threads together. Walsh's charm, Grayson's obsession, Miss Thorne's nerves, and Sir Reginald's looming presence. Each was a piece of the puzzle, and the Mapper de Havilland was the key that bound them. She resolved to visit Sir Reginald next, to test the collector's pride against her quiet scrutiny. The inn's clock chimed, and Miss Marple gathered her knitting, her eyes bright with VO purpose. Charm, she murmured, is a lovely mask, but it rarely fits perfectly. With that, she stepped into the autumn light, ready to unravel the next knot in the mystery. Chapter 6. The Collector's Pride. The winding lane to Sir Reginald Vance's manor was lined with ancient yews, their dark branches casting long shadows in the afternoon sun. Miss Jane Marple, her black velvet hat secure against the autumn breeze, walked with a measured step, her knitting bag slung over her arm. Sir Reginald had graciously invited her to tea after a polite note from the vicar, and Miss Marple, ever attuned to the nuances of human nature, sensed that the collector's grand estate might reveal as much about the man as his words. The theft of the Mapper de Havilland had stirred St. Mary's Mead, and Sir Reginald, with his known passion for rare artefacts, stood as a figure of both suspicion and intrigue. Vance Hall loomed at the lane's end, a sprawling Jacobean pile of red brick and mullioned windows, its chimneys puffing lazily into the crisp air. A butler, stiff in black livery, greeted Miss Marple at the door, his face impassive but his eyes curious, as he led her through a marble-floored hall. Portraits of stern-faced Vances glowered from the walls, their gilded frames gleaming, and Miss Marple noted the air of curated opulence, a place where wealth and pride intertwined like ivy. Sir Reginald awaited her in a library that dwarfed the village's own, its shelves laden with leather-bound tomes and glass-fronted cabinets displaying curios. An Egyptian scarab, a medieval chalice, a fragment of Roman mosaic. He rose from a wingback chair, a tall man in his 60s, his silver hair immaculate, his tweed suit tailored to perfection. His handshake was firm, his smile polished but not warm. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice resonant with authority, "a pleasure to meet you. I understand you're lending your unique perspective to this unfortunate business with the map." Miss Marple inclined her head, settling into a chair as the butler poured tea from a silver service. "You're very kind to see me, Sir Reginald," she said, her voice soft but clear. "I'm merely an old woman who takes an interest in village matters. The Mapper de Havilland is quite the loss, is it not? I hear you admired it greatly." Sir Reginald's eyes flickered, a shadow passing over his composed features. "Admired? I revered it, Miss Marple. A 16th-century masterpiece, its trade routes a testament to a world we've lost. I saw it yesterday, as you know, and its absence is a blow to scholarship and to my hopes." He paused, sipping his tea, his fingers steady on the delicate cup. "It would have been the crown of my collection." Miss Marple's knitting needles emerged from her bag, the lavender shawl taking shape with each quiet stitch. "Your collection must be remarkable," she said, her eyes drifting to a locked cabinet where a velvet-lined frame stood empty, its size suspiciously apt for a map. "Do you often acquire pieces like the Mapper? Such treasures must require great care." Sir Reginald's smile tightened, though his tone remained smooth. "Care, yes, and discretion. My archive is private, Miss Marple, built over decades. I've no need to steal what I can buy, or preserve for posterity." He gestured to the cabinet. "That frame awaits a new acquisition, nothing more. I was dining with friends in Chipping Cleghorn last evening. My butler can confirm I left at 4 and returned past 10. Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking rhythmically. "A fine alibi," she said lightly, "and so fortunate to have such a loyal staff. Tell me, Sir Reginald, what did you make of the archive room yesterday? Miss Thorne mentioned you were quite particular about the map." He leaned back, his fingers steepled. "Particular? I merely appreciated its craftsmanship. I asked to see it closely, through the glass, of course. Miss Thorne was kind enough to indulge me, though she stepped out briefly to handle a delivery. The case was secure when I left. I made sure of it." His voice carried a note of pride, as if his oversight guaranteed order. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her expression remained serene. "How thoughtful! And did you notice anything unusual? A scent, perhaps, or a mark on the case?" She recalled the oily smudge, mentioned now by Grayson and Walsh, and wondered if Sir Reginald's practised composure would betray a similar clue. He frowned, considering. A scent, perhaps a trace of oil, but I assumed it was Miss Thorne's polish. The archive is kept immaculate. As for the case, it was pristine save for the map's beauty. He paused, his gaze sharpening. "You're fishing for something, Miss Marple. Do you suspect me?" Miss Marple chuckled softly, her needles never faltering. "Oh, Sir Reginald, I suspect everyone a little. It's the only way to see clearly. You remind me of a gentleman I knew, a collector of rare coins, who guarded his treasures so fiercely he forgot to guard his words. Tell me, did you know of an anonymous letter about the map, sent to the library some weeks ago?" Sir Reginald's face stiffened, his fingers pausing on his teacup. "Miss Thorne mentioned it," he said carefully. "A trivial thing, likely some amateur historian. I advised her to be cautious. Rare artifacts attract all sorts. I assumed it was harmless." His tone was dismissive, but Miss Marple noted the slight clench of his jaw, a telltale sign of unease. "Harmless," she repeated, her voice gentle but probing. "Yet you were concerned enough to counsel vigilance. Collectors, I find, have a keen sense for threats to their passions. Have you received similar inquiries about your own collection?" He shook his head, a touch too quickly. "My archive is private, Miss Marple. I don't advertise its contents. The map, though, I'd have paid handsomely for it had the library ever considered selling. But theft?" He spread his hands, his smile returning. "I've no need for such risks." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes drifting to the empty frame once more. "Of course, a man of your standing has no need for shadows. Still, it's curious, isn't it, how the map vanished so neatly? Almost as if the thief knew the library's ways and its weaknesses." Sir Reginald's smile faded, replaced by a cool appraisal. "You've a sharp mind, Miss Marple, but I assure you, my interest in the map was purely aesthetic. I was at dinner when the theft occurred. My friends will vouch for me. If you'll excuse me, I have matters to attend." He rose, his manner polite but final. Miss Marple gathered her knitting, her movements unhurried. "You've been most generous with your time, Sir Reginald. I shan't keep you. But if anything comes to mind, perhaps a detail from the archive, you'll let Inspector Craddock know." Her tone was mild, but her eyes held his, steady and searching. He nodded curtly, escorting her to the door. As the butler led her out, Miss Marple glanced back at the library, its treasures gleaming under lamplight. The empty frame lingered in her mind, a silent challenge to Sir Reginald's polished alibi. His pride, she sensed, was both his strength and his vulnerability, like a squire she'd once known, who boasted of his honour while hiding a pilfered relic. Back in the lane, the yews whispered in the breeze, and Miss Marple's thoughts wove a pattern of their own. Sir Reginald's composure was flawless, yet his quick dismissal of the anonymous letter, his awareness of the archive's routines, and that faint oily scent, all were threads in the tapestry. The Mapper de Havilland was a prize that could tempt even the proudest collector, and Sir Reginald's vault, with its empty frame, suggested a man who planned for treasures yet to come. Her needles clicked softly in her bag as she walked toward the village, her mind already turning to the village whispers. The grocer's wife, the postman, the maid who hinted at late-night visitors to Vance Hall. Pride, she murmured, is a fine thing, but it casts a long shadow. She resolved to gather these threads, to see where they led in the quiet of St. Mary's Mead, where secrets hid behind every door. Chapter 7. The Village Whispers. The twilight draped St. Mary's Mead in a soft haze, the lamplights flickering to life along the high street, as Miss Jane Marple made her way back from Vance Hall. Her sensible shoes tapped a steady rhythm on the cobblestones, her knitting bag swinging lightly at her side. The village, with its thatched cottages and neat gardens, seemed to hum with an undercurrent of excitement. The theft of the Mapper de Havilland stirring its quiet pulse. Miss Marple, ever attuned to the murmurs of human nature, knew that the truth often lay in the chatter of those who watched and whispered, their observations as revealing as any clue in the archive room. She paused at the post office, where Mrs. Muggins, the grocer's wife, was sweeping the step, her apron dusted with flour. "Evening, Miss Marple," Mrs. Muggins called, her eyes bright with the prospect of gossip. "Terrible business at the library, isn't it? Never thought we'd see such a thing here." Her voice carried the relish of someone who thrived on village dramas. Miss Marple smiled, her expression warm, but her gaze sharp. "Quite shocking, Mrs. Muggins. The Mapper de Havilland was such a treasure. Have you heard anything about the visitors to the library that day? People notice so much, don't they, without even realizing?" Mrs. Muggins leaned on her broom, eager to share. "Oh, I saw that young Mr. Walsh, the tourist, strolling about near the library at dusk. Looked like he was waiting for someone, pacing by the lich gate. Odd, I thought, for a stranger to be out so late. And Miss Thorne, she's been that jumpy lately, hasn't she? My cousin says that she's got debts. Something about her brother's troubles in London. Never thought she'd let the map out of her sight, though." Miss Marple nodded, her knitting needles emerging from her bag as she leaned against the post office wall, the lavender shawl catching the lamplight. "Debts can weigh heavily," she said softly. "And Mr. Walsh, such a charming young man, I hear. Did you see him with anyone?" Mrs. Muggins shook her head, her broom resuming its sweep. "Not a soul, just him and his shadow. But you mark my words, Miss Marple, there's something about that one. Too smooth by half, like my nephew when he's after extra pudding." Miss Marple chuckled, filing away the image of Walsh pacing at dusk. "You're a keen observer, Mrs. Muggins. If you hear anything else, you'll let Inspector Craddock know, won't you?" She moved on, her mind weaving the grocer's wife's words into the pattern. Walsh's evening wanderings suggested more than idle curiosity, and Miss Thorne's rumoured debts added a new shade to her nervous demeanour. At the corner of the High Street, Miss Marple encountered Mr. Pye, the postman, his bicycle propped against a wall as he sorted letters. His round face lit up at her approach. "Miss Marple, helping the inspector, are you? That map business has the whole village talking. Never seen such a to-do." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled as she paused, her needles clicking softly. "It's quite the mystery, Mr. Pye. You must see so much on your rounds. Did you notice anything unusual at the library yesterday? Or perhaps about Miss Thorne? She's had such a shock." Mr. Pye rubbed his chin, his eyes narrowing with thought. "Now you mention it. I did see Miss Thorne at the library door, just after 6, locking up. Looked proper flustered. Kept glancing over her shoulder like she expected someone. And there's talk, you know. Her brother's in a bad way. Owes money to some rough sorts. I delivered a letter to her last month. No return address, postmarked London. She went pale as milk when she saw it." Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze steady. "A letter with no return address? How curious. Did you see its contents by chance?" Mr. Pye shook his head, his expression regretful. "Not my place to pry, Miss Marple, but it was typed, not handwritten, which struck me as odd. She stuffed it in her pocket quick as you like, and then there's Sir Reginald. My mate at the pub says his manners had visitors at all hours, coming and going in the dark. Not the usual sort either." Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloguing the postman's words. "You've a sharp eye, Mr. Pye. Letters can be such silent messengers, can't they? Thank you for sharing." She moved on, her thoughts turning to the anonymous letter Miss Thorne had mentioned, now echoed by Mr. Pye's account. Its timing, its secrecy, and Sir Reginald's concern about it suggested a thread that ran deeper than a casual inquiry. As she passed the Blue Boar Inn, Miss Marple caught sight of Molly, the barmaid, polishing glasses at the door. The young woman, with her quick smile and sharp ears, was a font of village talk, and Miss Marple paused, her knitting a gentle pretext for conversation. "Good evening, Molly," she said warmly. "You must be busy with all this talk of the map. Did Mr. Walsh, the young tourist, spend much time here yesterday?" Molly grinned, setting down a glass. "Oh, he was here, Miss Marple, charming the socks off everyone. Had a pint or two, chatting about his travels, Egypt, Italy, you name it. Left around 9, said he was packing for Bath. But I saw him later, near the church, just past 10. Looked like he was waiting for someone, checking his watch. Gave me a wave, though, all smiles." Miss Marple's eyes brightened, though her expression remained serene. "How interesting. And did he mention the library at all? He seems such a curious young man." "Not a word about the map," Molly said, leaning closer. "But he asked about Sir Reginald's manor. Wanted to know if it was open to visitors. Said he'd heard about its collection. I told him Sir Reginald's particular about his treasures. Doesn't like strangers poking about. He just laughed and changed the subject." Miss Marple nodded, her needles resuming their rhythm. "You're a treasure yourself, Molly, with such a memory. If you hear anything more, do tell the inspector." She moved on, the barmaid's words adding a new stitch to the pattern. Walsh's late-night presence near the church, his interest in Sir Reginald's collection, these were not the actions of a mere tourist passing through. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple settled into her armchair, the fire casting a warm glow over the chintz curtains. She drew out her knitting, the lavender shawl growing under her deft fingers. But her mind was elsewhere, piecing together the village's whispers. Mrs. Muggins had seen Walsh at dusk. Mr. Pye had noted Miss Thorne's agitation and the anonymous letter, and Molly had placed Walsh near the church at 10, asking about Sir Reginald's manor. These fragments, like threads in a tapestry, suggested connections yet to be fully woven. Miss Thorne's debts, hinted at by both the grocer's wife and the postman, could make her vulnerable to pressure or temptation. The anonymous letter, typed and secretive, pointed to an outsider's interest, possibly linked to Sir Reginald's concern. Walsh's charm and late-night wanderings suggested a man with more purpose than he admitted, while Sir Reginald's pride and mysterious visitors hinted at a collector's world, where treasures changed hands in shadow. Dr. Grayson's obsession, too, lingered in her thoughts, his scholarly zeal a potential mask for greed. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, each stitch a step toward clarity. She recalled a village scandal years ago, when a postman's gossip had unravelled a theft, his idle chatter revealing a servant's late-night errand. "Whispers," she murmured, "are the village's heartbeat. One only needs to listen." She resolved to arrange a meeting with all the suspects, to see how they behaved under scrutiny, their reactions as telling as any clue. The Mapper de Haviland was a lure, drawing out desires and secrets, and Miss Marple, with her quiet wisdom, was ready to follow its trail to the truth. Chapter 8. The Confrontation. The library of St. Mary's Mead, usually a haven of whispered pages and soft footsteps, held a charged air as Miss Jane Marple arranged for the suspects to gather in its archive room. The afternoon light streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the oak-panelled walls. But the room's sanctity felt brittle, tainted by the theft of the Mapper de Haviland. Inspector Craddock had agreed to Miss Marple's request for this meeting, his scepticism tempered by her reputation for unearthing truths. Miss Marple, her black velvet hat set aside and her knitting bag at her feet, stood near the empty glass case, her serene demeanour belying the sharp focus of her mind. The suspects arrived one by one, each betraying their unease in subtle ways. Miss Eliza Thorne entered first, her navy dress as crisp as ever. But her hands clutched a ring of keys, her knuckles pale. Dr. Harold Grayson followed, his wiry frame tense, his spectacles slipping as he clutched his worn notebook. Peter Walsh sauntered in, his grin bright but his eyes darting, as if measuring the room's exits. Sir Reginald Vance was last, his silver hair gleaming, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the other's agitation. He stood aloof, his gaze fixed on the empty case, with a flicker of something, regret perhaps, or triumph. Inspector Craddock, standing by the door with a constable, cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming. Miss Marple has a few observations to share about the theft. I trust you'll cooperate fully." His tone was firm, but his glance toward Miss Marple held a trace of deference. Miss Marple smiled, her voice gentle as she addressed the group. "I'm sure you're all as eager as I am to see the Mapper de Haviland restored to its place. It's such a curious theft, isn't it? No broken locks, no shattered glass, only a single smudge on the velvet lining, a mark left by a careful hand." Her eyes moved from face to face, noting Miss Thorne's tightened lips, Grayson's fidgeting fingers, Walsh's forced smile, and Vance's rigid posture. "I've been thinking about human nature," she continued, "how it reveals itself in the smallest ways, like a stitch dropped in a pattern. She stepped closer to the case, her fingers brushing the brass fittings. The thief knew the map's value, not just in pounds, but in prestige, in secrets. They knew the library's routines, the moments Miss Thorne stepped away. And they used something, glove oil perhaps, to handle the map without damage. That smudge tells a story, doesn't it? Miss Thorne's keys jangled faintly, her voice sharp. I locked the case at 6, Miss Marple. I swear it. No one could have taken it without a key. Her eyes darted to Sir Reginald, then away, as if regretting the glance. Miss Marple nodded, her expression sympathetic. Of course, Miss Thorne. Your diligence is unquestioned. Yet keys can be borrowed, can't they? Or copied, by someone who knows their chance. She turned to Grayson, her gaze mild but piercing. Dr. Grayson, your passion for the map's ciphers is admirable. You were alone with the case, checking its condition. Did you notice that oily scent others mentioned? Grayson's spectacles glinted as he adjusted them, his voice tight. I told you, Miss Marple, I smelled something polish, I thought. I was focused on my work, not sniffing the air. I'm no thief. I'd give anything to have the map back for my research. His fingers gripped his notebook, the pages crinkling under his touch. Miss Marple's eyes moved to Walsh, who leaned against a cabinet, his grin undimmed. And you, Mr. Walsh, a visitor with a wanderer's curiosity. You were in the archive, asking about the map's history. A few minutes alone, you said, yet you were seen near the church later that night, as if waiting for someone. Did the map interest you more than you let on? Walsh's laugh was easy, but his eyes narrowed. You're a sharp one, Miss Marple. I was just stretching my legs, enjoying the village air. The map? Pretty, but not my game. I'm more about living history than dusty relics. His fingers tapped the cabinet, a restless rhythm that belied his casual tone. Miss Marple turned at last to Sir Reginald, her voice soft as a whisper. And you, Sir Reginald, a collector whose pride is in preserving the past. You admired the map, lingered over it, ensured the case was, locked. Yet your manor has an empty frame, just the size for a map like the mapper de Haviland. And you knew of an anonymous letter, didn't you, inquiring about the map's provenance? Sir Reginald's face hardened, his voice clipped. I've told you, Miss Marple, I dined in Chipping Cleghorn that evening. My butler and my friends confirm it. As for the frame, it's for a future acquisition, nothing more. I'm no thief. I could have bought the map if I wished. His eyes met hers, defiant, but a muscle twitched in his jaw, a crack in his polished facade. Miss Marple stepped back, her hands folded, her gaze sweeping the room. Human nature, she said, is so very telling. Greed, fear, pride, they leave their marks, like that smudge on the velvet. Glove oil, used by those who handle treasures with care. Collectors, perhaps, who know the value of vellum. She paused, her eyes resting on Sir Reginald. Sir Reginald, your vault is a testament to your passion. But passion can lead us astray, can't it? That frame in your library, it's new, isn't it? Prepared for something specific. The room stilled, the air thick with tension. Miss Thorne's keys fell silent. Grayson's notebook trembled. Walsh's grin faded, and Sir Reginald's face paled, his hands clenching at his sides. You're mistaken, Miss Marple, he said, his voice low. I've nothing to hide. Miss Marple's smile was gentle, but her eyes were unrelenting. I once knew a gentleman, a collector of rare books, who swore he'd never stoop to theft. Yet his library held a volume that didn't belong to him, hidden in plain sight. Pride, you see, makes us bold and careless. She turned to Craddock, her voice calm. Inspector, perhaps a look at Sir Reginald's vault might clarify things. A new frame, an oily smudge. These are small clues, but they speak loudly. Craddock nodded, his expression grim. Sir Reginald, would you consent to a search? It would put this matter to rest. Sir Reginald's composure cracked, his voice rising. This is preposterous. I won't have my home invaded on a whim. But his eyes betrayed a flicker of fear, and Miss Marple knew she had struck a chord. The others shifted uneasily, their glances darting between Sir Reginald and the empty case. Miss Marple's needles remained in her bag, her hands still, but her mind was alive, weaving the final threads. The confrontation had revealed more than words, gestures, silences, the weight of guilt. The Mapper de Haviland was close, she sensed, hidden by pride, but not beyond reach. As Craddock prepared to act, Miss Marple stepped back, her quiet presence a beacon in the storm of suspicion. Chapter 9. The Confession. The archive room of St. Mary's Mead Library, its oak-panelled walls steeped in the hush of countless secrets, seemed to hold its breath as the confrontation drew to a close. Miss Jane Marple stood near the empty glass case, her small figure a quiet anchor amid the storm of suspicion. The suspects, Miss Eliza Thorne, Dr. Harold Grayson, Peter Walsh, and Sir Reginald Vance, stood in a tense semicircle, their faces betraying a mix of fear, defiance, and unease. Inspector Craddock, his notebook tucked away, fixed his gaze on Sir Reginald, whose polished composure had begun to fracture under Miss Marple's gentle but unrelenting scrutiny. Miss Marple's voice, soft as the rustle of autumn leaves, broke the silence. It's remarkable, isn't it, how a single act can ripple through so many lives? The Mapper de Haviland is more than a map. It's a mirror, reflecting what we value most. Her eyes, bright and unwavering, lingered on Sir Reginald. Pride, Sir Reginald, is a powerful force. It builds collections, legacies, even empires. But it can also blind us to our own missteps. Sir Reginald's jaw tightened, his silver hair catching the light as he straightened. Miss Marple, he said, his voice strained but still commanding, your insinuations are baseless. I've told you, I was dining in Chipping Cleghorn when the map was stolen. My friends, my butler, they'll confirm it. I have no need to steal what I could acquire through proper channels. His hands, clasped behind his back, betrayed a slight tremor, a detail Miss Marple noted with the precision of a knitter spotting a dropped stitch. Miss Marple inclined her head, her expression serene but her gaze piercing. Of course, Sir Reginald. Your alibi is strong, and your reputation impeccable. Yet the frame in your vault, so perfectly sized for the map, suggests a plan, does it not? And that smudge on the case, made with glove oil, points to someone who handles treasures with care. A collector, perhaps, who knows the delicate art of preservation. Miss Thorne gasped, her keys clattering to the floor. Sir Reginald, you didn't— Her voice broke, her face pale as she stared at him, her loyalty warring with doubt. Dr. Grayson clutched his notebook, his eyes blazing with indignation. If you've taken it, he snapped, you've robbed the world of knowledge. Walsh, leaning against a cabinet, raised an eyebrow, his grin replaced by a watchful stillness. Sir Reginald's face flushed, his voice rising. This is absurd. I won't stand here and be accused by a village spinster. But his defiance faltered as Miss Marple stepped closer, her presence calm yet commanding. "I once knew a gentleman," she said softly, "a collector of rare porcelain, who swore he'd never stoop to deceit. Yet he hid a stolen vase among his treasures, convinced it belonged with him. Pride, you see, can make us believe we're above suspicion." She paused, her eyes locking with Sir Reginald's. "You knew the library's routine, Sir Reginald. You lingered over the map, alone, while Miss Thorne was called away. And that anonymous letter, you were so quick to dismiss it, yet it troubled you. Didn't it? Because you knew it might draw attention to the map." Sir Reginald's hands unclenched, his shoulders sagging as if the weight of her words pressed against him. "You're mistaken," he said, but his voice lacked conviction, and his eyes darted to the door, as if seeking escape. Craddock stepped forward, his tone firm. "Sir Reginald, I must insist on a search of your vault. If there's nothing to hide, you'll have no objection." His constable moved to the door, ready to act. The room fell silent, the tension thick as fog. Miss Thorne's hands trembled. Grayson's breath came in short gasps, and Walsh's eyes narrowed, watching Sir Reginald with a predator's curiosity. Then, as if a dam had broken, Sir Reginald's composure crumbled. He sank into a chair, his head in his hands. "Enough," he said, his voice hollow. "I took it. The map. It was meant for my archive. It belonged there, not in a village case for tourists to gawk at." A collective gasp rose from the others. Miss Thorne covered her mouth, tears welling, while Grayson's face twisted with fury. "You monster!" he spat. "You've no right!" Walsh merely shrugged, his expression unreadable, as if he'd expected no less. Miss Marple remained still, her hands folded, her eyes gentle but unyielding. "Why, Sir Reginald?" she asked, her voice a quiet thread in the chaos. "You have wealth, status, a collection to envy. Why risk it all?" Sir Reginald looked up, his eyes haunted. "It was perfection," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The Mappa de Haviland, its lines, its secrets. I saw it, and I knew it had to be mine. I used a wax impression of the case key, taken when Miss Thorne stepped out. That night I returned, let myself in with a spare key I'd acquired from the library years ago, as a patron. I meant to keep it safe, to study it, to return it later." He laughed bitterly. "A foolish dream." Craddock signalled to the constable, who stepped forward with a notepad. "Where is it now, Sir Reginald?" the inspector asked, his voice clipped. "The map. Where did you hide it?" "In the vault," Sir Reginald admitted, his voice breaking. "In the frame you saw, Miss Marple. It's there, wrapped in silk, preserved as it deserves." Miss Marple nodded, her expression unchanged but her mind cataloguing the confession. "You took great care, didn't you? The glove oil, the clean case, it was no common theft. But pride, Sir Reginald, has a way of betraying us." She recalled a village squire, years ago, whose pride in his lineage led him to hide a stolen heirloom. Convinced it was his birthright, Sir Reginald's motive, cloaked in the guise of preservation, was no less personal. Craddock dispatched the constable to Vance Hall, with instructions to retrieve the map, accompanied by Sir Reginald's butler, who stood waiting outside. Miss Thorne sank onto a chair, her face ashen. "I trusted you," she whispered, her voice thick with betrayal. "You funded the library, and all the while—" Grayson, his anger unabated, clutched his notebook as if it could shield him from the truth. "You've no idea what you've cost us," he said, his voice trembling. "That map was my life's work. Walsh, still leaning against a cabinet, gave a low whistle. "Quite the show, Sir Reginald. Didn't think you had it in you." His tone was light, but his eyes were sharp, as if calculating his own escape from scrutiny. Miss Marple turned to Craddock, her voice calm. "The map will be safe now, Inspector, and perhaps Sir Reginald will find some peace and honesty, though it comes late." She gathered her knitting bag, her movements unhurried, but her mind was already tracing the final threads. The anonymous letter, the oily smudge, the empty frame, all had pointed to Sir Reginald, whose pride had woven a trap of his own making. As the suspects dispersed, Miss Thorne to her duties, Grayson to his notes, Walsh to his travels, and Sir Reginald to face Craddock's questions, Miss Marple stepped into the library's main hall, the weight of the mystery lifting. The Mapper de Havilland would return to its case, its secrets intact, but the desires it had stirred would linger, a reminder of the fragility of human virtue. Miss Marple's needles, tucked away, waited for the next pattern to unravel, as she knew they always would in St. Mary's Mead. Chapter 10. The Quiet Restored. The evening shadows stretched long across St. Mary's Mead, softening the edges of the village's thatched roofs and cobblestone paths. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cottage, the fire in the hearth casting a warm glow over the familiar chintz curtains and polished furniture. Her knitting needles moved with their usual rhythm, the lavender shawl nearing completion, its soft folds a testament to her steady hands. The theft of the Mapper de Havilland, which had set the village abuzz, was now resolved, and the quiet rhythm of St. Mary's Mead was slowly returning, like a stream settling after a storm. Mrs. Dolly Bantry burst through the garden gate just as the clock struck 7, her cheeks flushed with the thrill of the day's revelations. "Jane, you've done it again!" she exclaimed, flopping into an armchair without ceremony, her tweed coat askew. "Sir Reginald, of all people! The whole village is talking. How you cornered him in that archive room, like a cat with a mouse. Tell me everything." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes crinkling as she poured tea from a steaming pot. "Oh, Dolly, you do exaggerate. It was merely a matter of listening, you know. People tell you so much if you let them." She handed her friend a cup, her needles pausing briefly. Sir Reginald's pride was his undoing, as it so often is. The Mapper de Havilland was too great a temptation for a man who saw himself as its rightful guardian. Mrs. Bantry leaned forward, her eyes wide. "But how did you know, Jane? That frame in his vault, the glove oil, it's like something out of a novel. And poor Miss Thorne, nearly fainting when he confessed. I heard she's locked the archive tighter than a bank vault now." Miss Marple's needles resumed their clicking, a soothing counterpoint to Mrs. Bantry's excitement. "Poor Miss Thorne was burdened by more than the theft, I think. Her nerves, her debts, those whispers about her brother's troubles made her vulnerable, though not guilty. She trusted Sir Reginald, you see, as a patron, and that trust blinded her to his intentions." She sipped her tea, her mind retracing the threads of the mystery. The oily smudge, the anonymous letter, the empty frame, these were small things, but they pointed to a collector's careful hand. Mrs. Bantry shook her head, marvelling. And that young Walsh, slipping off to Bath the next morning. I thought he was up to no good, with all his charm. Was he really just a tourist? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her expression remained serene. Mr. Walsh was a distraction, shall we say. His wanderings near the church, his questions about Sir Reginald's manor, they suggested a man with an eye for opportunity. But his secrets, if he has any, belong to another story. The map was Sir Reginald's obsession, not his. She recalled a young man from her youth, all smiles and stories, who'd left a village with a stolen watch, but no proof to catch him. Walsh, she sensed, was cut from similar cloth, though the map had not been his prize. And Dr. Grayson, Mrs. Bantry pressed, with all his scribbling about ciphers. I thought he might have taken it. He was so frantic about losing his research. Miss Marple nodded, her needles looping the wool with precision. Doctor! Grayson's passion was genuine, but it was for knowledge, not possession. His anger at Sir Reginald was real. Scholars can be as protective as collectors in their way. But his alibi held, and his heart was in his notebook, not a thief's pocket. She paused, her gaze drifting to the fire. It's curious, isn't it, how a single object can stir such different desires? The map was a scholar's puzzle, a collector's trophy, a librarian's duty, and a tourist's passing fancy. Mrs. Bantry set down her cup, her voice softening. You saw it all, Jane, didn't you? While the rest of us were gossiping, you were stitching it together. Inspector Craddock was here earlier, you know. He says the map's back in its case, locked tighter than ever. He's calling you a marvel. Miss Marple chuckled, her hands stilling for a moment. Dear Inspector Craddock is too kind. I only see what people are, Dolly. Their fears, their pride, their little vanities, they're as clear as a pattern in wool, if you know how to look. She thought of a village seamstress, years ago, whose gossip had unravelled a theft by noticing a gentleman's mismatched buttons. Small things, miss, Marple knew, always told the largest truths. The fire crackled, and outside, the village settled into its evening hush. The Mappa de Havilland, restored to its velvet-lined case, was once again a quiet treasure, its secret safe under Miss Thorne's watchful eye. Sir Reginald faced his reckoning, his pride humbled by a confession that would linger in St. Mary's Mead's memory. Dr. Grayson, no doubt, was already back at his notes, chasing ciphers, while Peter Walsh had vanished to Bath, leaving only questions in his wake. Miss Marple picked up her knitting, the lavender shawl nearly complete. The village will talk for weeks, she said softly, but soon it will be quiet again. Until the next little mystery, of course. Her eyes twinkled, and Mrs. Bantry laughed, the sound filling the cosy room. As her friend chattered on, recounting the village's shock and her own theories, Miss Marple's needles moved steadily, each stitch a testament to order restored. The Mappa de Havilland had drawn out desires and secrets, but it was the quiet spinster, with her sharp eyes and gentle wisdom, who had traced its path back to the light. And in St. Mary's Mead, where every heart held a story, Miss Marple knew there would always be another thread to unravel.